Hello guys, it is me, the Tank Index here, and today I'm going to be talking about the French super heavy tank, the Char 2C. Now, technically, this is going in the World War I playlist because it was designed and supposed to be used in World War I. However, it will also be going in the Interwar/World War II playlist because that's when it was actually used, and this video will be covering much more interwar/World War II information. However, I did want to talk about it before the FT-17 because it was a competitor to the FT-17 and designed as its counterpart for World War I trench use. So yeah, let's just get right into the actual tank itself. Now, the Char 2C was the largest tank ever produced. Well, technically not produced, I guess that would be the mouse, but the largest tank ever seriously produced and actually adopted by any military at 68 tons. Its main armament was a 75mm Canon de 75 Modele 1897, I hope I pronounced that right, and 4 Hotchkiss Model 1914 machine guns, with 1 in the front, 1 on each side, and 1 in the back in an actual turret. Its maximum speed was 9.3 miles per hour and had an operational range of 90 miles. However, this was on paved roads, and obviously wars are not fought on paved roads, so who knows how fast it was actually in the field. Not to mention, if it went this fast and fought this long, it'd probably suffer a breakdown. Original armor ranged from 10 to 30 millimeters, but in 1930 and 1931, the maximum armor was raised to 45 millimeters for each tank. It had a 12-man crew, a driver, a commander, a gunner, a loader, 4 machine guns, a mechanic, an assistant mechanic, an electrician, an assistant mechanic slash an assistant electrician. He'd take both roles, I guess, and a radio operator. So, still a smaller crew than the A7V. The Char 2C was produced alongside the FT-17, or was supposed to be produced along the FT-17 as a super heavy tank in 1917. Sort of like the British land ships and the Whippet, the Char 2C was supposed to break through the enemy lines, while the FT would follow it in and support the actual infantry. It was an improved version of its prototype, the FCM-1A, and originally designated the FCM-1B until after World War I, when sort of the designations for tanks changed. 10 were produced in 1921 as super heavy tanks for the French army, likely because France, the heaviest tanks they really had were a few leftover Schneiders or Saint-Chamons, as covered in the last video, and other than that, all they had was a very light FT-17, so they likely wanted at least something bigger than that, so they went with 10 quality over quantity tanks, which, to be fair, in 1921, these tanks were fairly good and decent designs. However, by the late 20s, these tanks were on the bad side of alright, and by the 1930s, they were completely obsolete designs. They were just too slow and immobile compared to how tanks would evolve into being faster vehicles, as well as insanely prone to AT weaponry. They'd just be massive targets. However, unlike later vehicles such as the German Maus, which were actually intended to be fought with, the French army was fully aware of their impracticality and used them mainly for propaganda films. In movies, they would be shown climbing and crushing old fortresses, which is absolutely amazing, and I wish modern armies would make movies like this. They were named after French regions and provinces for propaganda use, and I know I'm going to butcher all these, but they were named the Poitou, the Provence, the Picardy, the Alsace, the Breton, the Touraine, the Argent, the Normandy, Berry, and Champagne. Normandy was renamed Lorraine in 1939. I know I just butchered all of those, and I'm so sorry. However, during the French remobilization of 1939, when basically, oh, you have a tank, alright, it's being used, all 10 were put in their own special unit, the 51st Bataillon de Chars de Combat. And before we talk about their actual service, there were a few varying models. The Champagne was modified with a 155mm howitzer in 1923 to 34. I'm sorry for the typo, but this was changed back to its original gun in 1934 due to the increased weight. The Lorraine tank was the commanding tank of the unit, so its armor was increased. It was given 90mm frontal armor, 65 side armor, and a total 75-ton weight. I'm so sorry for that typo, Jesus Christ. The FCM F1 was a planned replacement model for the Char 2C. However, France capitulated too soon to really produce the heavy tank. Plus, with the future French design, it would be pretty useless. after the war, and due to heavy tanks in general being phased out in favor of main battle tanks after World War II, it never really saw the light of day. Now, onto the Char 2C's actual service. Due to the tanks being morale-raising symbols, they were technically sent to the front lines, so the people would think they were being used. However, they were sent to the furthest back front lines, as France suspected the war would be similar to World War One, with stalemates and trench warfare along the Maginot Line. They were never really expected to actually see combat, and if they were, it would be the furthest German units that could be easily handled by just machine guns. However, due to the fast blitzkrieg used against the French, these tanks were reached fairly soon by the German enemies, so French troops destroyed the number 92 and number 95 to avoid their capture. And then the tanks were put on trains to escape, but the trains actually got stuck. So the tank's fuel was instead leaked and lit aflame, so hopefully they'd, explode and be unrecognizable. However, despite French efforts to destroy them, Champagne was still captured and displayed in Berlin until 1948, where it promptly disappeared, and no one actually knows where it went. I literally have no idea, and I don't know how such a giant vehicle could just disappear. I'm really hoping that it's just in some old ass warehouse somewhere, and we could find it one day, but I'm not sure. So, final assessments of this vehicle: just like many tanks designed in World War One and meant for the trenches, it would have been perfect for the trench warfare seen in the Great War. The large tank capable of busting through enemy lines without facing much damage, and not many would actually be destroyed. It would have been perfect for the French due to their low industry at the time. However, similarly to the Mark 8 Liberty, once the trenches were covered after the war, it really became an outdated design and no longer really useful. It was just too large of a tank in the post-World War I period. Planes like bombers and close air support were becoming more and more common, especially against the German Luftwaffe, and this tank would just be a target. Anti-tank rifles and field guns, while anti-tank rifles would not be too effective against these giant tanks, they were becoming more common, so more people could actually do some damage and cause some holes. And it would be more like dying to many bee stings instead of one giant bee sting. Not only that, enemy tanks such as the German tanks were becoming more prevalent, and made the Char 2C more of a living meme of the tank, because in World War One, the chances of a Char 2C actually encountering a German tank were slim to none, and if it did, it could definitely defeat the captured, modified British land ships Germans were using, the Butapanzers. The Char 2Cs produced would likely have been more useful as actual scrap metal, field guns, and support equipment, so honestly, they weren't much use as actual tanks. But I hope you enjoyed the video. Next time we'll be covering the Renault FT, which will be a massive video. So see you all then.